The highway stretched like a vein of black glass through the desert, silent except for the distant howl of wind cutting across dead land. Moonlight painted the asphalt silver, but in places it looked as though something darker bled through. Patches of road that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. No one drove this stretch after midnight, not willingly. Locals said it had taken more lives than the desert sun itself. On the night the story begins, a lone rig thundered down the line of cracked pavement, 18 wheels grinding against a silence too heavy for the hour. The CB was dead. No chatter, no weather reports, just static that fizzled and died whenever he tried to call out. Ahead, the dotted white lines blurred into a river of bone, drawing him toward something unseen. Old maps didn't mark this highway anymore. It was erased, like officials wanted the world to forget it existed. But truckers whispered about it at late-night diners, a place where headlights caught figures that weren't there, where engines failed at the worst possible moment, where a wrong turn could loop you back to the same empty gas station no matter how far you drove. Some said it wasn't a road at all, but a scar, cut deep into the earth by something not meant to be remembered. As the rig's beams pierced through drifting fog, shapes began to gather at the edges. They weren't deer. They weren't coyotes. They stood still, watching, their outlines sharp, but faces lost to shadow. The driver tightened his grip on the wheel, refusing to blink, because every time he did, the shapes inched closer, like frames missing from a reel. The road seemed endless now, curving deeper into a place where maps, memory, and mercy no longer applied. Some truckers who spoke of this cursed highway did so with shaking hands, warning rookies never to test its asphalt after midnight. But one man had no choice, and only he lived to tell what he saw, though even he swore part of him never came back. His ride through America's most cursed highway begins here, and it will not let you look away. There are stories born from small-town gossip, and then there are stories that bleed from the asphalt itself. This one belongs to the latter. The cursed highway isn't printed on new maps, and no highway patrol dares to admit it exists. Yet the whispers grow louder each year. Stories of truckers who vanish, rigs that are found burned to the chassis, and radios that pick up voices from nowhere. It is said that when midnight strikes, the line between the living and the dead blurs across this strip of American road. Truckers know the lore best. They sit in dim diners, coffee steaming in chipped mugs, trading tales they claim to have heard firsthand. Most dismiss them as scare stories meant to spook rookies. But there is always one older driver who leans in, his voice low, his eyes heavy with things he wishes he could forget. He doesn't tell these stories for fun. He tells them as warnings. This particular ride has become one of the darkest legends ever told from the highways of America. A story about a man who tried to beat the clock, who ignored every whispered warning, and who crossed onto a road that seemed to wait for him. It wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just coincidence. Something on that highway wanted him there. Something that feeds on those who stray past midnight. If you're listening to this now, it means you've stepped into the shadows with me. And before we go further, remember, these aren't just stories. They are cautionary tales carved out of blood, fear, and asphalt. Each one comes from a driver who didn't return, or returned broken in ways words can't explain. So before we begin the journey, make sure you're prepared. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your country. Because if you're here now, you're part of this haunted ride, and once you set foot on this cursed highway, there's no turning back. He took the load because the clock didn't care about curses. The dispatcher promised a fat bonus if he made the drop by dawn, and dawn was only a rumor out here. The trailer was sealed with a brass tag and a number he didn't recognize. The desert pressed close, starfields pinned above like a nail-studded lid. Somewhere past the county line, the regular interstate split away, and an unmarked ramp opened like a mouth. It wasn't on his route sheet. It was waiting. The last real light before that ramp flickered over a diner with a buzzing M that refused to stay lit. Inside, a waitress with tired eyes slid him coffee and said nothing until he mentioned the shortcut. Her hand stopped midair. The TV over the counter hissed with snow, the clock above it insisting on 11:59. She leaned in and told him some roads remember what they've taken. He left a tip that trembled under the fluorescent hum and went back to the rig because rent, bills, and promises were heavier than omens. He eased onto the ramp and felt the asphalt change. It wasn't a texture he knew. Too smooth in places, too slick in others, as if fresh skin had been laid over old bone. The white dashes tightened, crowding the lane, drawing the truck into a narrow trustfall with the dark. The CB coughed, then fell silent. The air in the cab turned refrigerator cold, frosting the edges of glass. Somewhere in the radio static, something breathed between channels, a shape of a word that didn't quite become sound. Mile markers began wrong and kept getting wronger. The numbers were painted backward, stenciled like reflections. The GPS spun and reset, glitching the arrow in a small, anxious circle. Twice he passed a sun-faded billboard for a fireworks stand that had burned down decades ago. Twice the scorched scaffolding appeared right where the billboard promised it would be, listing like a ship in black grass. When he glanced at the atlas, the page was blank where his finger should have landed. He kept going because stopping felt worse. A photo tucked in the visor corner watched him. His kid on a beach years ago, hair plastered to his forehead, cheeks salt bright. Money kept the boy in school and the apartment warm in winter. A man could live with ghosts. A man couldn't live with the power shut off again. He squeezed the wheel until old scars blanched, and the trailer's weight answered with a low, faithful pull. Fog stitched itself across the road like a gray curtain. Shapes rippled behind it. Not quite animals, the way bad memories aren't quite true. He passed a bullet-pocked billboard that said, "Remember us," in peeling red script, and he didn't remember anyone who would speak through a sign. The CB clicked to life on channel 19 and someone whispered, "Keep right, keep," before another voice shushed it with a long breath that steamed the speakers. Something stepped into his high beams. Yellow, thin, wrong. He hit the brakes and the rig bellowed, tires screaming, rubber burning, the night tilting in slow, oily degrees. The thing didn't run. It dissolved, sinking straight down into the black road as if the asphalt had opened its throat to swallow. The smell that rose was metallic and damp, like rain in a blood bank. He stopped dead in the lane and listened to the engine idle like a beast that had learned to be quiet. He rolled again because other choices felt like tricks. The mile marker said 13 3 times in a row. On the second pass, he threw an empty coffee cup out the window to prove the loop. On the third, he ran over the same cup, now crushed flat and tracked with tar, and he knew the road wasn't trying to be clever. It was teaching. A blue-white gas station blinked into view on the shoulder. The same brand the diner's napkins advertised. The same arrangement of dead-hanging plants. The open sign glowed, but the windows reflected only his own headlights. He pulled in and found no pumps, only concrete islands and a payphone roped with cobweb. On the glass door, Polaroids were taped in a grid. Truckers in ball caps, arms slung over shoulders, smiling like they'd won small victories. Under each, a name and a date. The newest was tonight's date. The name under it was his. The photo itself was blank, the square a clean, expectant white. He didn't go inside. He didn't breathe for a count of 5. Then he put the truck back in gear. The AM dial yielded a voice that didn't belong to a station. It was a child singing off-key, an old lullaby that should have made a man soft inside but instead went skeletal, clacking the bones of memory. The overpass ahead bore a message in burned-out bulbs, slow to listen. As he passed beneath, a ripple traveled the guardrail as if hands were running along it, and his name burst across the windshield in a flurry of moths that smacked and stuck, forming letters before tumbling away. The highway narrowed until it felt like a corridor. Ahead, barricades sagged across both lanes, striped and rusted. A light arrow blinked, insisting he take a service road that wasn't wide enough for a bicycle. Behind him, the dark shrugged and every reflector's cat eye winked out, one by one, like a predator closing its many lids. He was not alone in the mirrors. Another set of headlights sat back there without a car attached, just the twin suns hanging low, patient. He inched forward. A figure in a yellow rain slicker rose from the ditch, water pooling in a place where it never rained. The figure raised a flare that burned cold, blue as glacial ice, and mouthed something as the sound died in the air between them. "You are late." The gauges on the dash fell to 0 with a clean surgical grace. The engine gave up without protest. In the silence that followed from the black throat of the trailer, something knocked, 3 slow times, and the lock clicked open by itself. The knock from the trailer wasn't thunder or road rattle. It was deliberate. 3 sharp reports, like knuckles on a coffin lid. Then silence. The trucker sat frozen, sweat crawling down his neck, listening as the desert itself held its breath. Out here, miles from any town, no one should have been inside that trailer. The manifest listed dry goods, shrink-wrapped and strapped tight. Nothing living, nothing that could knock. The padlock on the rear door had snapped open by itself. In the side mirror, he saw it swinging in the wind that wasn't there. His hand hovered over the CB mic, but the radio had died again, the display blank as a tombstone. The headlights still glared forward, catching the slick yellow of the raincoat figure now gone. In its place was only the barricade and the endless wrong-smelling fog. Against all reason, he climbed down from the cab. Gravel crunched under his boots like brittle bones. The desert night wrapped him in silence too thick, like sound had been vacuumed away. He reached the trailer door, fingers brushing metal that should have been warm from the engine but instead bled a chill like ice. The door rattled once. He stepped back. Something inside shifted, heavy, slow, as though dragging its weight toward the thin crack of moonlight seeping through. He pulled the latch. The hinges groaned, not like steel but like throat. The door rolled back and darkness bloomed outward, swallowing the spill of headlights. At first he thought the trailer was empty. Then came the breath, long, wet, rasping, the kind of exhale that fogs glass in winter. The smell hit him a second later, damp cloth, rusted metal, and something sweet rotting underneath. Stacks of shrink-wrapped pallets stood like mausoleums, but in the center, space had been cleared, and something moved. It was a shape larger than any man, hunched low, a ribcage rising and falling under tarp cloth. The tarp flexed outward with every inhale, pulling back with each exhale, like lungs made of canvas. He staggered backward, stumbling into gravel. The tarp twitched as though it felt him, as though scent carried through the slit in the door. Then, slow as if savoring, one corner peeled back, revealing not flesh but eyes. Too many of them, small, lidless, gleaming like wet stones under river water. All fixed on him. The trucker slammed the door shut. The lock clanged home without his hand touching it. He scrambled into the cab, fumbling the ignition even though the key was still turned. The rig coughed back to life with a jolt that rattled his teeth. Behind him, something struck the inside of the trailer, once, twice, in anger. The truck lurched forward, skidding gravel, tires screaming until they bit asphalt again. He didn't look back. Mile markers blurred past, all of them carrying the same number. 0. 0 miles. 0 distance traveled. He pressed the pedal harder, the engine growling, but every sign insisted he hadn't moved. The headlights behind him, the floating pair with no car attached, remained steady, always 50 yards back, not closing in, not falling away. He realized then that the trailer felt heavier. Whatever lived inside was moving, shifting, dragging its weight forward as if crawling closer to the cab. The AM dial clicked again, spitting static before settling on a whisper. Not words, just breath, ragged, in sync with the thing inside the trailer. Then a child's voice cut through, sweet and cruel. "We're almost there." His son's voice, the one from the beach photo. But his boy was 3 states away, tucked in bed. The driver gripped the wheel hard enough to ache, refusing to answer, refusing to believe. The voice repeated, softer this time. "We're almost there." He caught sight of a rest stop ahead, fluorescent glow, vending machines, a picnic table sagging under rust. He swerved in, tires hissing, pulling the rig to a stop under buzzing lights. The trailer rocked once, as if whatever was inside shifted to look out. He climbed down, knees weak, and walked toward the restroom block just to put distance between himself and the cargo. The men's door hung ajar. From inside came a dripping sound, slow and steady. He pushed in. Fluorescent tubes stuttered overhead, drowning the room in pale sickness. The sinks were cracked, mirrors fogged, though the air was dry. Stalls stood closed, except one. From under the door, a shadow stretched long, but the feet casting it were wrong. Too many toes, jointed the wrong way, clutching the tile like talons. The dripping grew louder, a rhythm not of water, but of something chewing, slow and wet. He backed out before the shadow could move. But when he turned, he wasn't at the rest stop anymore. The restroom had bled away, replaced by desert flatland, the rig idling in the distance, trailer rocking gently, as though someone paced inside. Between him and the truck, dozens of Polaroids hung from strings tied to posts, swaying in a wind he couldn't feel. Faces stared from them, faces he half recognized from diner booths, fuel stations, even obituaries taped to corkboards. Near the end of the line, one photo showed his son again, only older, gaunt, and standing in the doorway of the trailer. The wind picked up, snapping the strings. The Polaroids scattered into the dark, but the one of his son clung to the post, fluttering, waiting for him to take it. When he did, the rig's headlights flared. The trailer door swung open by itself, and from inside came the sound of chains dragging. He stood with the Polaroid pinched in 2 fingers, the paper warm as skin, the image refusing to settle. The rig's headlights flared, and the trailer door breathed open, chain links dragging like a long necklace across metal ribs. Wind slid over the desert without touching his clothes. The road beyond the rest stop bent wrong, as if a surveyor's hand had shaken, and a green sign rose from the fog with letters that seemed damp. Exit 0, Gideon Hollow. He had never heard of it. The floating headlights behind his truck held their distance, patient as vultures. He climbed back into the cab, and the engine answered like it had been waiting, rumbling low, forgiving. The ramp to exit 0 sank into a cut through rock, walls close and glossy, paved with a sheen that remembered storms that never fell. The CB coughed awake. A voice not attached to a throat said, "Scales open." Another voice, older, added, "Bring your dead." Fluorescence bloomed ahead, an old way station strung with chain link and moths, the booths scabbed with stickers. The sign over the scale flashed green, then a softer color that didn't belong to bulbs. He rolled onto the platform. The rig settled with a hollow thud. The digital readout blinked and stuttered. Numbers tumbled like dice. Then they climbed the wrong direction. 13, 26, 52, as if the station weighed what he'd managed to keep away. Behind glass, a clerk sat rigid, eyes the gray of TV static. No breath fogged the window. A printer churred and spat a ticket, the paper ribboning and curling against the sill. He leaned from the window and took it. "Pay what is owed," it said, and underneath, in a scratch not unlike his own hand, "You know the currency." The trailer shifted its weight, a low slide like a sleeper adjusting in a too narrow bed. The padlock, new an hour ago, hung open again, its teeth slick with black. From the dark inside, a whisper smoothed out the syllables of names. Those diner faces, those obituaries, the Polaroids. His name threaded quietly among them, a thin needle. The readout ticked higher, 77, every time the boy's beach photo flickered in his mind. He dropped his eyes, fists tight. He killed the engine, threw the brake, stepped down. He unlatched the air lines and tugged. The fittings held. They felt less like couplers and more like sutures. Gideon Hollow lay right where the exit promised. A main street stitched across the flats, all sepia at first glance, bright as new memory when seen in glass. Store windows showed a living town, people carrying paper bags, a teenage girl spinning a keychain, a cop laughing into a styrofoam cup. But the street itself lay vacant. Dust combed itself into neat furrows. A barbershop pole turned without moving. He walked past a pawn shop and saw himself reflected in the glass. Beside his reflection, his son at age 5 tugged his sleeve, mouth open to tell him something he couldn't hear. He turned around to face an empty sidewalk. The figure in the yellow slicker stood in the crosswalk, rain dribbling off the hood though no cloud hung overhead. The flare it held burned the color of hospital hallways. The hand lifted, fingers ruined at the tips, and gave the old construction signal, "Keep right." The figure's mouth moved in the rhythm of speech, but only the church bell spoke, tolling somewhere ahead. The tone didn't ring, it reversed, sucking sound backward. He followed because not following felt too much like choice. Inside the church, carpet squished under his boots. Photographs coated the pewbacks, nailed through at the corners. Drivers, families, pets with names in neat block letters. The pulpit wore a ledger the size of a mechanic's Bible, leather cracked and oiled by years of hands. When he opened it, the ink swam for half a second, then held. Names lined the left-hand column, dates the right, and in between, the price. A wedding day, her brother's laugh, the smell of pines after rain, line after line, traded. When he found his own, the middle column was still blank. The penciled note beneath it read, "Due before dawn." He closed the book too hard, and dust unstitched itself in the air. Stained glass windows changed the outside to ocean. Waves rolled slow against the panes, pressing until the lead cames bowed. Salt flooded the sanctuary without getting anything wet. On the altar, the beach photo lay by itself, ribboned at the edge as if carried in a pocket too long. A voice off stage, soft as a teacher's, said, "You can keep him safe." The words didn't promise. They rearranged the room so that belief felt inevitable. Drive the sealed cargo to the bridge. Pay what is owed. He found breath in the space that command left behind and used it to refuse, though refusal came out like a swallow. He stepped into the aisle, but each step sank deeper, as if the church wanted to hold him in place long enough for grief to do its work. Outside, Gideon Hollow's street had moved, closing ranks around the rig. The clerk from the scale waited by the driver door with a receipt stapler, its teeth the color of bone. The floating headlights had drifted closer and, from this angle, resembled a grill he recognized. The old freightliner his father had run until whiskey did the steering. He climbed into the cab before anything could be attached to his skin. The steering wheel felt colder, the leather pulled tight like an old scar in winter. The ticket from the way station lay on the seat now, though he hadn't brought it. The words, "Pay what is owed," bled through the paper and printed themselves faintly onto the cushion. He turned the key and the engine came alive without argument. The town receded the way a nightmare does when morning insists. The yellow slicker lifted the flare and rode a path in smoke he could follow. Exit 0 closed behind him, not with a gate but with absence. The ramp now pure desert, scrub growing where tire grooves had been. The highway accepted him again, but the lane narrowed to a bridge drawn across nothing. The sign announced Gideon Hollow Bridge in letters that dripped. A river ran beneath, black and busy, although the map had sworn the land was dry. The trailer doors trembled as if in a chill. One lock snapped, then the other, a sound like knuckles cracking in a quiet room. He checked the mirror. The tarp inside the trailer unrolled by itself, sliding back in a ripple that was almost tender. Those Riverstone eyes opened, too many to count, reflecting his headlights into constellations he didn't know. Water smell flooded the cab. A small voice came from the dark cargo, precise as a photograph developing. "Help me, Dad." The shifter thudded into neutral without his hand touching it. The truck began to roll down the long back of the bridge, and the highway leaned toward him as if it had been waiting to hear his answer. The rig rolled in neutral, a slow surrender down the spine of the bridge. Rivets throbbed under the tires like metal hearts, the guardrails humming with a private current. Beneath, the river worked, oily and fast, busy with reflections that did not belong to stars. The shifter shook once, twice, then stilled as if clamped by a colder hand. From the open seam of the trailer came the boy's voice again, perfect as a memory with its corners still sharp. "Help me, Dad." The words fogged the windshield from the inside. In the mirror, the free-floating headlights drew nearer, no hood, no grill, just patient suns. When they caught the chrome, they threw back a shape he recognized, a square-shouldered silhouette, a familiar tilt of the cap. His father had taught him these roads, how to feather the brake, how to nurse a dying transmission across 3 states, how to offer nothing to a rumor. But old advice turned brittle under the river's breath. The boy's voice in the trailer frayed at the edges, stretching too far, vowels pulled thin like hot glass. A booth rose at the bridge's throat where no booth had stood a second ago. White tile, jaundiced bulbs, a glass window clouded by the touch of many foreheads. The sign above it flickered between words. Toll, debt, due. Behind the glass, the way station clerk sat motionless, receipt stapler beside her like a sleeping insect. When he slowed, a drawer slid open by itself. Inside lay a ledger, the same cracked leather from the church, the same two unwavering lines beside his name. Date. Tonight. Price. You know. The pen rolled toward him, stopping on the ridge of his palm like it recognized his skin. He tried money first. Bills, a wad crushed tight from the visor. The drawer refused, pushing the cash back until it creased. He spoke the sum he'd earn at dawn, said he'd double it, triple. The bulbs dimmed, unimpressed. A different currency was wanted, one that couldn't be printed. The beach photo curled in his shirt pocket, warm as a living thing. He understood then what Gideon Hollow had been teaching with Polaroids and names. The ledger didn't want cash. It wanted a day, a laugh, a smell that proved he had loved. In the mirror, the tarp within the trailer rose and fell, a slow cathedral of canvas. Voices threaded from beneath it like wires twisted together. They whispered the titles of other drivers' trades. Her first word. 5 snow days. The way he looked at me that morning. Lines paid, tallied in wet ink. If he surrendered the beach day, the sunlight on his son's hair, the salt on those small lips, the shock of cold when the wave took them both to their knees, maybe the highway would let him pass. Maybe the thing in the trailer would sleep. Maybe the boy would keep breathing in a world where he hadn't learned to bargain. He reached down to the red pull for the fifth wheel release, a last bad idea. If he dropped the trailer here, maybe the river would take the dead instead. The handle refused him like a tooth set wrong, unmoving under his weight. His knuckles went blood bright. The free headlights closed to a surgeon's distance, the air around the cab thinning until every breath scraped. The CB popped alive with a whiskey rasp he knew. His father's. "Don't be a fool," the voice said, each syllable scraped clean of warmth. "I paid. Your turn." The stapler in the booth clicked once, hungry. The figure in the yellow slicker stepped onto the rail, water streaming from a sky that had not learned rain. Under the hood, not a face, only night stitched to bone, teeth like drowned piano keys. It raised the blue flare and traced a clean arc over the side, an invitation, or an instruction. The river answered with a thick burp of bubbles, something enormous rolling just beneath the skin. The bridge wanted a body. The ledger wanted tender. The trailer doors yawned. Out stepped a boy the highway had built from stolen glances and pocketed breaths. Older than the photo, but carrying the same tilt of grin, the same cowlick refusing to obey. He left wet footprints where his feet touched steel, each print shaped like a question mark. "You're late," he said, and the sound licked at nerves that had taken years to scar. The lights of the booth softened as if moved to mercy. He knew the trick. He still took a step. Love is a lever that lifts gates even when rust swallows the hinge. He chose because the bridge demanded a choice. He slid the beach photo from his pocket and felt the texture of the paper, as if reading braille of the past. He tore it clean down the middle, then again and again until the pieces were confetti. He cupped them in both hands and blew them into the drawer. The scraps didn't fall. They hovered, caught in a draft from nowhere, then curled into small white moths, which beat their paper wings and settled along the ledger's spine. The bulbs flared. The stapler fired. The drawer snapped shut. Relief should have come. Instead, a hollowness opened where the day had lived. He reached for the shape of his son's laugh as the wave hit, how it bubbled and broke, how it made him stupid with joy. The sound slipped. The edges of the memory peeled away like sunburn. In its place, an echo. A laugh existed, yes, but belonged to no one he could name. The engine took a breath on its own. The shifter slid into gear without his hand. The free headlights sank backward, as if humored for now. From the trailer, the cargo growled low, not animal, not machine. A creak like a house settling after the last resident leaves for good. The boy on the bumper began to fade where the moths had kissed the ledger, his outline blurring into steam. He reached out as if to claim what he'd been promised. He was losing it, the small hand, the salt, the mercy of that flimsy day. And the bridge, unsatisfied, flexed its spine as if hungry still. The river rose until the spray tapped the windshield like fingertips. The dashboard went dark. Something climbed the cab, weight dragging across paint and rivet, and a hand, small, wet, impossibly cold, slid over his eyes as the rig tilted into the kind of night that does not have a bottom. The cab went blind when the hand closed over his eyes. He clawed at the wheel, but the road had already vanished. The bridge tilted, shuddered, then dissolved beneath him. No crash came, no splash, no scream of shearing steel. The truck floated in a black current, wheels spinning without friction, headlights tunneling through a void that had never known morning. The gauges all pointed to nothing. The odometer clicked once and froze on 0.0. He blinked, and the hand was gone, yet his vision didn't return to normal. The world sharpened wrong. The road beneath him had length but no landmarks, just an infinite stripe pulling him forward. The rig's shadow stretched ahead instead of behind, running faster than he could. In that shadow, shapes twitched, heads, shoulders, outlines of men he didn't recognize, all waving him down like stranded motorists. When he looked through the windshield, there was only asphalt and fog. When he looked at the shadow, they were closer. The CB coughed alive again, rolling through voices like a stuck record. A child laughed. A woman whispered in his ear, "Almost home." Then the whiskey rasp returned, his father's tone, low and flat. "This is the mile you don't finish." The static clung like smoke in his throat. He shut it off, but the speaker kept breathing, fogging the glass with every exhale. The mirror showed the clerk from the booth now seated in his passenger chair, skin flickering like TV snow, stapler resting in her lap. She smiled without teeth, then vanished. The trailer bellowed from within. Metal screamed as if a storm lived inside it. The weight shifted forward, the hitch groaning, the whole rig bowing like it would snap in half. He pressed the pedal, not to flee, but because the silence behind the roar was worse. The engine responded, not with diesel growl, but with a choir of voices, layered, hundreds deep, chanting the same two words. Pay. Owed. Pay. Owed. Tires smoked. The odometer refused to move. At mile after mile of zero, the fog finally split. A truck stop appeared, glowing neon, perfect in its mundanity. Pumps, diner, ice machine humming, a Pepsi sign hanging tired in the window. He pulled in because there was nowhere else to go. The lot was full of rigs, dozens of them, parked neat in rows. Every cab was running, headlights lit, but none had drivers. He opened his door and the air stank of ozone, like wires burning under skin. He walked among the trucks and saw faces behind the glass. Not corpses, not quite. Drivers frozen mid-motion, hands on wheels, mouths half open like they'd been caught mid-prayer. Eyes glossy, but alive enough to follow him. Inside the diner, every booth was filled. Truckers he half remembered from Polaroids, the girl with the keychain, the man with the crooked cap. Even some he thought he had only imagined, his father at the corner booth, whiskey glass in hand, grinning wide. No one moved. They breathed in unison, their chests rising, falling, the sound like a slow bellows pumping. The waitress from before stood behind the counter, hands flat, her face sagging with grief. She lifted a coffee pot and poured into a cup that overflowed endlessly, steaming onto the floor. Without looking at him, she said, "Sit. Your mile isn't done." He refused, turning back toward the lot. But the door he'd used was gone. In its place, a long hallway stretched out, wallpaper stained, ceiling lights buzzing, doors lined either side, each marked with numbers. He passed 12, 13, 14, each creaked open a crack, each leaking a smell, a sound, salt water, children's laughter, gunpowder, burnt rubber, pieces of lives bartered and lost. When he reached 19, the door swung open fully. Inside, he saw his son, not as the boy he knew, but as the Polaroid had shown him. Older, hollow-eyed, standing in the trailer doorway, beckoning. The hallway trembled, buckled, and then fell away. He was back in the cab. The rig was already moving. Ahead, the highway had narrowed to a single lane. No shoulder, no exit, no way back. The yellow slicker figure stood in the center line, flare raised, mouth working silently. In the high beams, the hood drew back. No face, no bone. only a mirror. And in that mirror, his own reflection, hands still gripping the wheel, eyes black as the river. The flare died. The reflection smiled. The odometer ticked forward, finally, 1 single mile, 1.0, before all the gauges blew red. The truck barreled into fog so thick it became wall, and when he braced for impact, none came. The rig vanished into the mile that doesn't end, and the highway sealed itself behind him. To this night, drivers swear they see his headlights up ahead, just beyond reach, always at the edge of fog. Some claim they hear a child's voice in the CB when the clock nears midnight. Others say they've passed that diner, seen that clerk, only to arrive with hours unaccounted for. But none can say where the cursed highway begins, or where it finally ends, because it waits for its next toll, its next driver, its next memory to steal. By dawn, the highway looks ordinary again, just faded paint and wind-stunted scrub. But the night keeps its receipts. Somewhere out there, a pair of headlights runs just ahead of the horizon, never closing the distance, never falling away. Truckers who swear they don't believe still take the long way around, still turn the radio down near midnight, still glance at the visor photo and feel an empty space where a laugh used to live. The cursed mile doesn't bother with proof. It prefers hunger. They say the bridge sinks and rises with the driver's breath, that the toll booth appears only when a man carries something worth surrendering. Gideon Hollow might be a town or a bruise. It doesn't matter. What matters is the ledger, and the quiet arithmetic of loss it performs with a stapler's click. If the road ever gives anything back, it's thinner than memory, worn smooth like a coin passed through too many hands. He is out there, they murmur, the one who paid in pieces, pulling the night along behind him like a wounded animal that refuses to die. So if the fog thickens and the mile markers start counting wrong, keep your hands steady and your heart louder than the radio. Don't answer the voice in the trailer. Don't meet your reflection when it smiles. And if you survived this journey with me, share your thoughts below. And if you're brave enough, tell me which haunted road you'd never dare to drive alone.